All right. Hello. Welcome, everybody. My name is Jen Guile. I'm your host for LeanAppSec Live, and I'm excited to have Adam, Katie, and Amar joining as speakers today. I'll bring them on shortly, but we'll do a little housekeeping before we get going. So let me know in the chat where you're joining from today. I happen to be in beautiful Raleigh, North Carolina, which is not normally where I am. I'm a West Coast girl. But I'm out here this week for All Things Open, which was a really fun Monday and Tuesday to my week, connecting with the open source community, connecting with the Raleigh tech scene, and now I'm here. So we'll get started shortly with the programming, but I see people from all over. We've got Atlanta, we've got India. Oh, I see someone in Durham. You're not too far away. Bend. Hey, Matthew. Glad to see you. San Jose. So we've got lots of people from all over joining. If this is your first time to LeanAppSec, then welcome. If you're a repeat joiner, I'm happy to have you back here. We will be going through about 2 hours today where we have experts. We're going to be talking about ways to be more effective in application security, basically using concepts borrowed from lean manufacturing, because we know that these days it's not common for you to get more budget, more headcount, more time. Teams are shrinking, budgets are shrinking. But that doesn't mean you can't be effective. And so we're going to be talking about the different ways that you can be effective, whether you're a security engineer, whether you're a software engineer, or somewhere else in the organization. If you care about application security, you are in the right place. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and launch our first poll. I would love to know who's joining us today. So you should see a pop-up on your screen asking what role fits best for you. Are you security? Are you GRC, software development or engineering, a product manager, a consultant, a student, or something else, perhaps a marketer or someone in sales? So go ahead and submit your vote. And while we're waiting for people to vote, I'm going to bring Adam to the stage. See, Adam, I don't know if you're allowed to bring yourself, but if not, I'll pull you in here. We all know how to use technology, but sometimes the technology gets in the way, huh? So Adam should be here in just a second. Hey, Adam, how's your day going?
It's great. How are you?
Oh, it's great. I have so been enjoying Raleigh. You know, it's beautiful weather, first of all. I don't mind being someplace a little warmer than the Northwest. And the tech scene here is really vibrant. I have just so enjoyed, getting to meet people. What about you? How's your week going?
It's great. I'm in Boston for some stuff, and they brought the Pacific Northwest weather to make me feel comfortable.
I
It
know there's a bit of a nor'easter, isn't there?
Yeah, it's been rainy and cold. I feel right at home.
I bet. So I'm just looking at who we have for people attending today. I see about half of attendees are in some kind of a security title. Welcome, this is for you. And then we've got quite a few people in like some kind of a consultant or other category, followed by people in GRC, software development engineering. Of course, this is for you as well. And then a couple other smaller buckets there. But we'll set that aside and start talking about threat modeling. So for anyone who's not familiar with the format, we kind of have basically a round of 3 lightning talks. Adam is going to talk for about 20 minutes about threat modeling, and then we'll do a 10-minute live Q&A. So you'll see this platform is very much like any other, event platform you've been in. There's a chat, there's a questions tab. So please use the chat for just, chatter. And if you have an actual question, pop into the questions tab. I'll be monitoring it throughout the event. And during those kind of 10-minute blocks after each lightning talk, I'll be pulling out the questions for the speaker to answer live. And then anything that we don't get to there, we try to hit at the end in a little bit of a panel, or we can follow up with you afterwards. The top question we get asked is this being recorded? Can I get this later? Yes, you can. So I see a question has already come in. What will be the topic of this event? So we have 3 different topics today. Adam is going to be talking about threat modeling. Our second speaker, Amar, is from Adobe. He's going to be talking about how his team uses AI in their daily workflows, but in particular, a little bit of a case study about how they used AI to automate the creation of new laugh rules, which I think every time I talk to him about it is so cool. And then we have Katie Norton from IDC, who's going to be talking about industry analysts, and in particular, like, what are some of the common myths about them? When can you use them, regardless of what your role is? So look at that. The Q&A worked. We already got to one. So we'll go ahead, and without further ado, Adam, why don't you, do you want me to share your slides, or do you want to?
Let me do that. I just didn't want to like interrupt your flow or something.
No, take it over.
All right.
All right.
So, hi
I'm going to hide
everybody.
myself, and you go.
Okay, cool. I'm happy to be here. And, as Jen was saying, none of us have extra budget these days. None of us are getting extra head count. We're all trying to do more with less. We're all thinking about how can we leverage tools to be more efficient, more effective. And I'm just going to be frank. Threat modeling has something of a bad rap. It has a rap as being heavy. It has a rap of being slow, and people sometimes shy away from it. And I think that's a shame because one of the key principles of Lean is do it right the first time. Don't keep making the same mistakes. And one of the things that happens in AppSec is we develop our software, we run it through a pen test. Oh my gosh, there's big problems. Who'd have thunk? And then we get into these ugly escalations. And I think threat modeling, no, I don't think. I know. I see every day threat modeling changes that dynamic by helping you think about security up front. And so let's start out with what is threat modeling. It's actually super simple. It's using models to help us think about security. It's getting rid of some details so we can see the whole of what we're working on at a given time and think about what can go wrong with it. And when I say threats in threat modeling, excuse me, means possible future problems. Nice story you got here. It would be a shame if something were to happen to it. And you can do this if you're producing software from scratch. You can do this if you're assembling enterprise systems or operational systems out of a mix of open source, commercial projects, and some business logic that you're writing. You can threat model each of these. And the way I like to think about it, the way I like to sell it, to be honest, is threat modeling is the measure twice, cut once of security. If you're in a machine shop or a wood shop and you cut a piece of wood once and you cut it too short, it goes in the scrap pile in the corner. And that's visible. We all see, we learn very quickly, oh, I destroyed that. In software, in building technology, that pile of wood in the corner is wasted development time. It's missed schedules, and it's still there, but it's less visible. The other thing I like to say as I'm convincing people that they ought to give threat modeling a shot is this quote from Frank Lloyd Wright. He said, you can fix it on the drawing board with an eraser or on the job site with a sledgehammer. The same thing applies to the technology we're building. So how do we threat model? We like to threat model using the 4-question framework. And these 4 incredibly simple questions are, what are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? Did we do a good job? And we'll talk about ways to answer these in just a second. But the thing I want to start from is that nobody has ever said to me, Adam, that's an irrelevant question. I do X in technology, and I don't think I need to answer one of those or one or more of those. And that gives it some power These questions, which I created when I was working on my first threat modeling book or in the threat modeling manifesto, which is a consensus sort of thing about how to threat model. And my company, Shostack Associates, has a white paper titled Understanding the Four Question Framework, because the questions are actually sort of surprisingly nuanced. Um, and so these, as I said, simple questions, and they lead us to these very scenario appropriate ways of answering the questions. And I'll talk about those. And it allows us to align threat modeling with the engineering process. Each of you works at a unique place that has found a way to deliver value. The way we do Agile here is. And if I were to come in as a consultant, as a trainer, and say, Jen, I want you to rip up your playbook for shipping value and replace it with mine, what would you say? She'd say, I got to turn my mic
Say
on.
no.
Yeah, exactly. You'd say no. And so if we ask these questions, we can think about how do we build this into the way we deliver value? The other thing they do for us is they give us a common language. When I'm talking to the CEO and I ask what can go wrong, I get an answer. It's different than the answer an engineer might give. But if we start asking the question of everyone, we get this continuum of answers, we get this set of answers, and we should be doing things about those potential problems. And so it's really powerful. The one thing I want to mention is as I've taught more and more people about threat modeling, I've learned that this concept of boundaries is one, and a boundary, just to define it before I talk about it, the user kernel boundary, the firewall imposes a boundary. It's that simple. We're isolating things from each other. And finding your boundaries, enhancing your boundaries, possibly adding boundaries is something you can do as you're threat modeling, and it's high value. But let me talk about how to answer the questions. We can answer the question sort of the classic way of threat modeling that many people learned in an apprenticeship model is they go to a whiteboard and start talking about, hey, what are you working on here? We can use Lego models. There's some people who have done work on that. It's a lot of fun. We can use data flow diagrams, which are a classic because data flow diagrams are easy to draw. They resemble what we draw on the whiteboard. They're simple to learn. And importantly, threats tend to follow data. This message contains an attack or the response to an attack. And so data flow diagrams are really useful for helping us understand what are we working on in a way that helps us find the threats, to ask what can go wrong. And we can just brainstorm. We can talk about that in a room. And the other day I was chatting with Dave LeBlanc. And if you don't know Dave and his work, he's one of the authors of the Writing Secure Code books. He's been in security. I first met Dave, not even going to admit exactly how long ago it was, but the year started with a one, not a two. Uh, and so Dave was saying, I remember this session where we had no process, no formality. We just got in a room and talked. And as we talked about it, it became clear that different people had very different perspectives on how the system was put together and where security was happening. And surprise, everyone thought security was someone else's job. And that came out of some brainstorming. It came out of Dave's skill as a moderator, his experience as a smart security guy. And as we scale up threat modeling, so I've been threat modeling for a long time. And when I joined Microsoft in 2006 and realized I had to scale, I realized brainstorming wasn't the only answer we needed. And Microsoft had a system called STRIDE, which is a mnemonic for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and expansion of authority. I say it once in a while. Um, and STRIDE helps you find threats. And some people like to say that STRIDE is old and tired. I like to say it's a proven classic, and I still use it as one of my go-tos. We can also use kill chains proactively to think about the question of what can go wrong with a system. And these structured ways of answering help us take threat modeling from that conversational approach to an engineering approach, which we can replicate. And the challenge that we run into is as we add that structure to give people predictability, definitions of done, um, that can lead to that heavyweightiness. And so I focus in on the questions as a way to keep us on track in thinking about the things that matter as we're trying to threat model. Let me give you an example of what the output might look like. So here we've got a simple data flow diagram. Um, you can see my mouse. Okay, so over here we've got a browser. It connects to a user interface. And in this case, I've got an internet-enabled camera, right? And so there's a database system over here. There's an updater to get more information about, or to get the camera new software because it's buggy. And maybe I've got an app on my phone that talks to the camera. And I've divided up. I've got a little trust boundary here around the camera. I've got another one inside because there's the camera app that's running and the kernel. And I might do a more, and I can start, by the way, with just this and say, how does the user interface know who's operating the browser? How does the cloud system know which camera that user is authorized to go and talk to? Those are problems of spoofing or expansion of authority if I can get to other people's cameras. And so we can start asking questions with these super simple diagrams. We can get a little bit more detailed about what's happening there, right? So maybe we'll put a user interface in one process and business logic in a second and updater in a third, and we divvy that up with some more boundaries. We can choose to do that. We can choose to convey that in a diagram, especially as our companies are growing, using these diagrams to say, this is your lane, this is the piece that you're working on, and you need to stay coordinated can be helpful. So we can use diagrams at different levels of abstraction, and we can think about the question of what can go wrong. And I jumped ahead a little bit, but also access to the database might allow information to go between customers. The version 1 diagram didn't have compartmentalization. The blast radius, if you like that terminology, was bigger. And that leads to lower reliability because more errors can cause more problems in more areas. One of the things that we get from better isolation, better trust boundaries, things running as different users, is that the code is simpler, the interfaces are more defined, and the bugs we get are simpler, allowing us in a lean way to go faster by taking a minute at the start to be thoughtful about what we're doing so we have a clean, organized workspace and we can ship quickly and confidently. And that's so valuable in today's world. And structure, I talked about structure a little bit. Structures lead to consistency. And so if I am brainstorming, if that's the way I'm threat modeling, I go into one room, I get one set of answers. I go into another room, I get a different set of answers. And that happens because people in those rooms have different experiences, different skills. Maybe they saw different things in the newspaper that morning or as they were doom scrolling. And so you get different answers. And so we build these mechanisms, these structures, these ways of doing our work, like Stride, like kill chains, like DFDs, that allow me to go in and look at a threat model and say, oh, this is what they did. And I don't have to learn the diagramming type. I don't have to learn um, a new programming language. I can say, yep, I understand what's happening here. Let's talk about the important questions. And that lets me collaborate broadly across lots of different teams with different personalities, different immediate goals. And one of the places where threat modeling falls down is we move away from those structures because a lot of security people, and I know there's a lot of security people on this call, say, I want to do it this way. Awesome. You can do it your way. I'm not saying don't, but recognize that every time you go in and you do something different, there's a chance that something will go wrong. You're going to confuse people. And so one of the things we do about it is we develop more consistency in how we're threat modeling. So I like to think about threat modeling as a big tent. It's very much like developing software. There's lots of tasks that we do. When we're developing software, we um, write code to implement functionality. But that comes after the task of writing a user story. If we're doing test-driven development, I've written some tests before I start writing code. Excuse me. There's a lot of tools that we use. You might be a Visual Studio user, you might like JetBrains, you might like GitHub, you might like GitLab, you might even be old school and using SVN or some other source control system. The way we think about our deliverables, the way we think about our skills, so variable, and threat modeling can be the same. It can be broad, flexible, more than one way to do each task, more than one tool, people form different deliverables, etc. And if you think about threat modeling as a monolith, um, you must do it Adam's way, or you must do it, I don't want to pick on anyone else, so you must do it someone else's way. Um, you're going to be slower, but you're going to be less able to adopt it to the way your organization does stuff. And so, one of the things the 4-question frame does for us is it allows us to think about building blocks. Rather than saying we threat model using the STRIDE methodology, we say we threat model using the 4 questions. And in this instance, and in most instances here at the Acme Company, we're going to start with STRIDE and use something else if STRIDE isn't working. That allows people who are threat modeling, for the first time to get a sense of what it is. Okay, I'm answering this question. What can go wrong? Okay, weird. I don't quite understand why, but someone wants us to do it differently today. That's fine. We're still answering those 4 questions. The other thing I want you to think about as a security person is you want to engage early while there's time to fix it on the drawing board. When you set up a review process, when you set up an approval process, the natural engagement with that is I'm going to do my work. I'm going to dot my I's, I'm going to cross my T's, and I'm going to bring you a completed document looking for your approval, your review. And that review, I don't want to make changes, right? I want to go through this approval process and get my sign off. And if you engage early rather than in a review, you end up in a much more productive, much more lean sort of world. And so to get started, I really want to encourage you to simply ask what can go wrong. If you want to go a little bit deeper, there's a gamified version of this called Elevation of Privilege. It's a card deck. You can buy the card decks. There's the showstack.org/EOP link there. One of my partners makes them. You could also just download it. There's free versions at GitHub. Microsoft was nice enough to Creative Commons license it after I created it. And so Elevation of Privilege will draw people in a little bit more. And in a couple of weeks at OWASP Global AppSec in DC, I'm going to be doing a training, threat modeling intensive using AI with AI. I'm going to be delivering the keynote at Global AppSec. Come say hi. And also, there are 6 other threat modeling talks at that conference. And it's followed by Threat ModCon, also in Washington, D.C., that Saturday. And so there's an amazing opportunity in just a couple of weeks to come to Washington, D.C., and learn an enormous amount about threat modeling. And with that, I am going to
Yeah, let's get into some Q&A, right?
yeah, exactly.
All right, I'm gonna hide your slides and
Hey,
now
Katie will
just
be there.
ask.
Looking forward to meeting you.
I know we're gonna be there. Endor Labs will be there. So I don't know if anyone's gonna be at Global AppSec. Drop it in the chat. Let us know where you'll be. And in the meantime, I have a first question from the Q&A, Adam, for you.
Cool.
I have a feeling I know what you're going to say to this, but I'm going to ask it and I'm going to add a little bit to it. So the question is, Adam, what is your preferred or favorite threat modeling tool? Now, I have a feeling you're going to say it's going to depend a lot on your organization and things like that. So perhaps a little of like, how would you choose a threat modeling tool to use? So what's your take there?
So I'll give you the honest answer to this. My favorite threat modeling tool is a whiteboard marker. And the reason people pick up tools is they're looking to solve a problem. That problem might be we're in a regulated industry and we can't give our regulator photographs of a whiteboard. They'll, it's the word I want, they'll be disappointed in us.
It doesn't look official enough,
It doesn't
basically.
look official enough. What again, while I was at Microsoft, the SDL threat modeling tool, which I created while there, was designed to help people who didn't know how to get started answering the question, what can go wrong? There are more modern tools, things like OWASP Threat Dragon does a similar sort of thing to the SDL tool. There's a lot of tooling that is attempting to build AI into the process to help people get going. I was talking to a buddy recently, works for a company, you all know them. And he said, we're getting between 75% and 90% of the way there with AI. But that last bit is a real challenge. It's a stumper. And my friends at Arius Risk are doing great work on automating it. There's a new startup every week that's trying to automate it. But Armando, the thing I want you to focus on is what problem do I want my tool to solve for me? Because that will help you pick one that solves that problem.
That's great advice. And we have 2 more questions. The first one is, should threat modeling be done per feature and should it be enforced to the SDLC?
Yes and yes. And let me add a whole bunch of nuance to my yes. My friend Izar Tarandak has a set of talks he's given titled things like continuous threat modeling or threat model every feature. And if you think about threat modeling as something that's going to produce a document, you can't threat model every feature. You have to make it lightweight. And I like to say, think of threat modeling as a dial, not a switch. You want a little bit of threat modeling for every feature. What can go wrong with this thing that we're working on, right? This story, this epic. And my experience is something between 60 and 90% of features have no real security impact that requires deeper threat model. You don't have to turn the dial and get big. Some features do. And if you just get in the habit of saying in the user story or in the backlog grooming that you're doing, saying, we considered security and we believe this story has no security impact, to me, that is enforcing it in the SDLC in a lean way that enables you to threat model every story. If what you want, and I was talking to someone recently, They spent 6 figures getting a consultant to do a threat model of a thing they were working on. You can't do that in every story.
Yeah, that
And
could get really expensive really fast.
it's expensive, it's not lean, it's review, and it doesn't fit into the way that we develop products. And I think that is so important, that you think about threat modeling as a dial so that you can apply it to everything you're doing.
Well said.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. Let me make sure I don't lose track here. How do you figure out when you're done? How do you know if you've done enough?
Um, don't worry about that. What you want to do is you want a time box. You want to say, we're going to spend up to an hour threat modeling this, and then we're going to stop. And if somebody says, I think more would be useful here, then do the more. But if we start from the checklisty, I need a diagram with at least 4 boxes and 4 arrows, and I need 1 stride threat for each of those, people very, very quickly start gaming your system. And when they're gaming the system, because your definition of done is too onerous, you're not going to get to the value that you want. And if you spend a little time with each story and you recognize that it's going to take us time, at a larger company, it can take a year or more for threat modeling to really become a part of how you do things. And if you make big demands at the start because you have big aspirations and big hope, and I love those big aspirations and big hopes, but if you push too hard, people will push back. And if you can turn around and ask them, do you think you're done? Do you think you did a good job? And the reason we have this "did we do a good job" question is to help people reflect on the work they've just done. You can use a standard agile retro style of what went well, what went poorly, what do we keep doing, what do we change? And that will get you towards the what is the right thing for us here. The only other thing I want to say about this real quick is, if you work at a medical device maker, the Food and Drug Administration has a very, very specific set of pre-market guidance, which explains to you exactly what a definition of done is, which is more heavyweight, but then again, you're making medical devices, so you're sort of used to it.
Okay, we have time for one more live answer, and then I promise to all of you whose questions we didn't get to live, I will connect with Adam afterwards, and we will record some quick answers. You can follow our LinkedIn channel to see those. So the last question that we have time for before we pivot topics is from Mohammed. I love this question. Are there any threat model-based projects for students or security researchers can do to improve their knowledge of threat modeling?
So there's a whole bunch of things you can do, and those include coming to OWASP Global AppSec. It includes the threat modeling community that the ThreatModCon team is putting together. It includes my books, honestly. And the other thing, where is the chat? Let me go into the chat. I'm just going to drop a link in here. Something I do when I see a threat model that I like is I talk about it on my blog in a category that I call Threat Model Thursday. And what I do is I pick this thing up that I like, and I say, what do I like about it? Where do I wish they had done something different? Why do I wish that thing? And my entire goal is to share with you my belief. And I would encourage you to do the same thing. And when you see a threat model you like, pick it up and ask, what makes me think they did a good job? And write down your answers, talk about your answers, and say, what can we learn from this? We're all learning. and this is to tie back to the title of the event. This is what Lean is about, is learning, evolving our practices, making them better, and making the next thing that comes through the system better than the last one.
I love it. Well, Adam, thank you for taking the time today. I know you've got a lot of stuff going on. You won't be able to stay for the rest of the event. So I'm grateful you were able to make this half hour or so.
You're welcome. And if there are more questions, Jen, you're going to send those to me and we'll get emailed answers to folks.
Exactly. We'll address that after you and I are both back at home.
Sounds good. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Right on. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and bring Amar to the stage. And while we're getting Amar connected, we'll run our second poll. This poll is on your personal experience with generative AI. So we'd like to kind of have an understanding of what your personal experience is. Would you describe yourself as a Jedi master, to the extent that somebody can be that today for such a newer technology? Or are you on the far opposite end of like, really, I should not touch that. I don't know what I'm doing at all. So just take a second, pop in your vote. And while we're waiting for those to come in, Amar, it's great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
So Amar, you and I met, I think, at B-Sides in Seattle. It feels like last year, but it was only like 6 months ago. Amar is the chapter president in Seattle for the Cloud Security Alliance, heavily involved with the community, a leader for the Adobe product security team. Amar, tell everyone a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Amar, and I am a senior manager at Adobe, leading DevSecOps. So primarily leading two projects, one around web application firewalling, so figuring out defenses to protect web applications, and another one around fuzz testing our desktop products, the ones that you're probably familiar with, Photoshop and so on. Those are C++ code bases that were built a long time ago, and they need to be looked at and fuzz tested. And luckily, we were able to make more progress lately with developments in the AI industry.
Right on. Well, just looking at our poll results, almost half of people said that they would categorize themselves as a youngling. They can handle the basics of Gen AI. The next category up is our Padawans who know enough to be dangerous. And then we have our Jedis, and then a handful of people are like, hands off. So great diversity of people here. I'll let you take it away to talk about the project your team has been working on at Adobe.
Absolutely. I'll share my screen. All right. Hope everyone can see my screen.
We have it. I'm going to go ahead and hide, but I assure you I'm still here. I'll be keeping an eye on the Q&A.
Thank you. Yeah, again, I am very excited. First, I'm really honored to be here just because a big fan of Adam's work, for example. So this is like, hey, how did I end up presenting alongside someone like Adam? So very honored. And also, I am a practitioner like most of you guys. So I'm someone who wakes up in the morning, 9 to 5, doing security. And I've always been part of smaller teams, and we will talk about that. So I would like to make the problem concrete. Generally, why we're looking into using AI within security engineering, and we'll maybe pick a single example, which is how to modernize some of the legacy security tools that are out there, maybe been there for 10, 20 years, signature based, rule based, more like most of our security tooling, using the latest features within AI. So let's get started. So if you been living right now, like, you are, this is the unprecedented times. Like, these are very interesting times. Those times will go in history similar to when we discovered electricity or put cars on the highways or even discovering fire. Like from 2019 maybe to 2030, there's a lot is going to be going on. Lots of discoveries. We are building data centers. The way we work is changing. There is hype for sure, but there is also some useful tools that are coming out of it that we should not ignore. That's my kind of take on this. So a balanced approach to AI. I'm not all in, but I'm also carefully looking at what I can take out of it and use day to day to just make my my life easy for the following reasons that are coming up. So let's talk about our challenges as security practitioners. Whether if you've been here like doing security for a long time, you know these. Maybe you have not gone through listing all of them and talking through them. If you haven't been in security, these are the challenges that you're going to be facing coming into this field. And Adam and Jen, both of them talked about it, and it's all about uh, it's all about this conference, which is LeanAppSec. Like we always lean, we always have more information to process than people to process them. So the first challenge is we have smaller overloaded team. That could be, you could be a SOC analyst. You have a lot of alerts. You could be an AppSec engineer. You're dealing with so many false positives from legacy tools that are scanning your code base and telling you things that are not true. Or, you saying things that you do not know how to sort through and figure out. So this is going to be a fact. Any team I worked for, that was the case. We were not as funded as other teams. We are a central team. We cannot grow linearly to the rest of the organization. No one is going to allow that. This is the reality. The second challenge here is software is eating the world, meaning there is more software every day than the day before. And thanks to AI, there's anyone now is able to generate software. And experienced developers are, outdoing their previous self maybe 10x. So this is just a subset of the tools or the products that I need to secure. This is not even all the things. So you probably familiar with these products. You heard about them. Some of them you never heard about. And but this is just a subset of uh, what I have to worry about day to day. Second, there's always more regulations. Like today, there's more regulations than the day before. Whether it's EU is concerned about AI development, whether it's additional upgrades to established frameworks like FedRAMP, PCI, NIST, you name it, there's always something new. So this is on you. Like you have to budget for this. You have to allocate time to work on this. So you're not only um, overloaded and there is more software, there's more regulations. Vulnerabilities. Just this is how I start my day. I go to Google and do security news, and this is what I get daily. Like it's a lot. There is a CVE every day. There is an NPM issue for you to work on every other week or month. And sometimes you know about it because someone detected it. Sometimes you just don't know about it because no one kind of detected it. So uh, there is more vulnerabilities every day. We had about 40,000 CVEs, documented CVEs last year. I don't even know how much we have this year, but it's probably more with all the AI and the MCP servers and whatnot. So these are our day-to-day problems. Now let's pick one thing that we can use as an example instead of just a broad, set of problems. Most of our vendors were not created for this era. Most of the vendors were created like maybe 20, 30 years ago. I'll give you an example, web application firewalls, which is something that I work on. Those are typically developed these are not typically, but they are developed for all customers. They're not developed for your use cases, for your application specifically, for the type of traffic you process, whether you process credit card information or not. WAF is what was just developed, and you kind of need to use it, but is it doesn't handle the last mile problem, right? Like Amazon delivers a package to your home. Is this is WAF is not designed like that, and you have to figure that problem out. So let's get more deep into these gaps. For example, um, tuning. You have to tune WAF, meaning you create a general set of rules for known issues. Imagine this. You only are able to detect and respond to things that were detected in the past. So WAF has a database of known issues. If there's a new emerging issue, you are out of luck until the issue a rule is developed for that issue. Meaning you always going to have rules that you don't need or have less than what you need. Meaning you don't know what you need, because the WAF is not designed for your source codes. It's just designed for all source codes out there. So you end up with false positives, meaning you could block a legit request. The request, because just WAF got confused. Maybe the user was, attempting to reset their password and they tried multiple times quickly. WAF could say, well, this feels like an automated thing. I'm going to block it. Also, WAF does not have access to your source code, your threat model, your application architecture, your nothing. It doesn't understand any of that, and the rules are just static. They're not dynamic. They don't evolve. You need a WAF team that regularly review these things manually and update WAF accordingly. So if you have 400, maybe 200, in my case, web applications, like I showed you the slide of products that I have to take care of, I cannot scale with a smaller team. This is just not possible. And in the past, we just gave up. We did our best, but that was it. So, what is the solution? I think the solution is apparent. Look at the development in engineering and AI and see what you can do. So let's talk about some of the things that we did internally. There's some low cost or no cost opportunities here. So let's pick few, and we can also do a demo if we have time. So imagine this. In the past, we are told, hey, Photoshop is going live. They have a web application now. You have to deploy WAF there. We have a generic general security baseline rules that we deploy regardless. Maybe you don't have a SQL database. We're going to give you SQL injection rules. We just don't know yet until we sort through the code. And most of the WAF engineers, they just do not know how to read code base. Even developers, like when you tell a developer, hey, you have to read like 50 files of code, this is an overwhelming task. But with an AI IDE like Cursor AI or Cloud Code or anything, they can actually go and read the code for you, and they could actually map out all the public endpoints, the expected parameters, all of it. For example, if you have an email public endpoint that only accept emails, we can figure that out. We have a user endpoint that deletes users, update user, add new user. We know, for a fact that this endpoint should not do anything else. And we can create a rule that actually is smart enough to say, well, like no one should be tinkering with this endpoint trying to add an email. It's a user's endpoint. It's not an email endpoint. So I'm going to block this request that doesn't make any sense. So this is just an example. Like you can have maybe have like access to one of those IDEs today. Go to one of your web applications today and ask it to build a JSON output of all the public endpoints, all the expected parameters, all the interactions like within your app. So you have a context aware um, file. So you can use that file. You could say, hey, IDE, based on this um, code base, can you generate like AWS WAF rules for me, just targeted for this application? And you'll be surprised that you will get a very, very good starting point. And that now becomes our baseline. So we do not put WAF a generic set of baseline security rules. We now actually generate very targeted WAF security rules. So other examples, and I'm not going to dig in details into all of these, like this is, there's more examples, but maybe we'll talk about another example. So imagine you want to expand this system. You cannot manually grab an ID and do it, go to each code base, one at a time. This is a good starting point, but what if you would like to generate rules based on your documented threat model? Maybe you want to generate a threat model using an IDE, like an AI agent. Maybe you have the application architecture, diagrams, and all of that good stuff. Maybe you have more like the compliance frameworks. You can take all of this information and put it in a RAG database, which is a retrieval augmented generation database, meaning when you talk to an LLM, the LLM will have access to a database with very, very recent and accurate information. It's not using its training data, it's not using data from the internet, it's actually using your internal data. Why is this powerful? WAF vendors do not have access to any of this data. They give you generic WAF rules. Based on this, you could say, could you generate WAF rules based on my information, by threat, the application specific threat model, the documentation, the code base, all of that. So you now added more context. So AI thrive in context. The more accurate context you give it, the more recent data you can get. So do not rely on LLM to do all the work for you, because LLM has risk. We'll talk about those in an upcoming slide. So AI could also dynamically prioritize rules. So WAF process request based on the rule priority, meaning if you have a priority one rule, that will be processed first. But AI can dynamically look at your traffic patterns. This could be a custom ML model you built, as I will talk about later, because in some cases you really have to do that. So that would be enough about some of the opportunities. In this case, alerting could be looked at, and so on. So the first thing you have to do when looking to solve this problem is data. Actually, the hardest thing we like I'm experiencing now is really curating clean, good data. The AI is like the data is actually your like end goal. Like if you give AI bad data, like a custom ML model, you're going to end up with a bad solution. So, for example, I'm going to look at my source code. WAF vendors don't have access to this. I'm going to get that data, clean it up. I'm going to look at my architecture document, threat model, vulnerability scanning results. This is really important. Dynamic, maybe scanning results, static code analysis, the business logic. And I can also have like a threat, like I could build an MCP server, which is um, just a way for your LLM to have access to tools. So if there is a complicated tool with an API, you don't really have to master the API architecture to be able to talk to it. You can just use natural language like English to communicate to an LLM and tell it, hey, could you can you get me the last 10 bad IPs that were reported to us? And this data could be stored in a threat intel database that you have locally. So this is a use case for a RAG and MCP. So if you have all of this data, you clean it up, it's good to go. You can then feed it to an AI to make not just WAF rule security decisions. There's so many security decisions you can make based on this data. Maybe you want to harden the application by fixing bugs or detecting issues or like whatever. Like there's so many things that you can do, and you can just do that based on the app. You're not having, a lot of engineers who can do this manually. So might as well use AI just because it's much easier. So once you have the data, now you have to build the intelligence. The intelligence is a collection of AI tools. Like it's clear that LLMs are not getting better. Like if you look at the difference between GPT-4 and GPT-5, which was a huge investment as compared to GPT-4, that we're not seeing a lot of gains. Yeah, there's some gains in some areas, but at this point, it's all about the tooling around LLMs, like MCP servers, agents, RAG databases, retrieval augmented generation databases, and so on. So now, step number one is to get the data. Step number two is just to build the intelligence framework or to build the brain that does all of this. And it really depends on the use case. So sometimes you cannot use an LLM. You have to build a custom ML model, like a lightweight one. For example, we decided to analyze WAF logs or HTTP traffic using a custom built machine learning model using just classical traditional M model. You can use, depending on what you're trying to do, there's so many algorithms that you can pick from, random forest, decision trees. There's so many other options like clustering ideas and so on. So depending on what you like to do, you have to pick the right algorithm. And I will give you like 20% of how to do ML in one slide. All of the training looks the same, and most of it you don't really need to be like a machine learning expert. You know that would be nice. But by expert, I mean I don't think you need to know all the math behind building those algorithms because there are so many libraries that abstract this away right now. Like you just bring the good data, clean data, and start exploring. Those some of those models are lightweight; they can run on your laptop, so you can start learning today. Um, so let's assume your system requires like a custom ML model. You have a system that can use LLMs, but you have another system that cannot use LLM because you just do not trust the data. In that case, you could either have an option to build a custom machine learning model or give this LLM access to your data, which is via retrieval augmented generation. So all machine learning training is going to look like these three lines that I'm commenting out here. First, import the model you want to use. In this case, it's scikit-learn. There's TensorFlow. There's all of these machine learning models that were developed by very smart people at companies like Google, Meta, and so on. So those are used for very sophisticated things that you can use in security. It's open source. So you import a model. Second, you instantiate that model, which is, if you look at the line 2 here commented, hopefully it's big enough so you guys can see it. First, you have to train, which is fit the model. The model is like when someone says model, it's really after training, the ML says, this is my understanding of the patterns in this data, and I'm going to give you like a file that you can save locally that anytime you add new data, like you ask it about new data, it should figure it out. So you typically need evaluation and testing data and training data. The evaluation data should be like one third of the entire data. And after that, you start, if the tests start passing, you use this in production. But don't get too excited and just trust it. I know like no one trusts AI fully. It can hallucinate. Training that data could be stale. Like most of these models are trained on like last year data, for example. Uh, it can also be non-deterministic, which is actually a good thing because you can build a non-deterministic probabilistic model, but have a very deterministic wrapper around it. So meaning non-deterministic would be like your LLM. So this is the core. And the deterministic things could be like your corporate data, your source code, and things like that. Um, AI could also be a little expensive if you are not careful. So I really don't, encourage responsible use of AI just because of the impact on the in the environment, right? Like we're burning a lot of tokens. So really understand how you save tokens, how you be really efficient there, like you know, just in keeping up with the theme. It's all about being lean. So be careful there. But now there are cheaper models coming that are very small, like the tiny recursive models. Those are competing with the heavy, large LLM models. So things always improve, costs always go down. We figure out how to reduce hardware spending and so on. So I'm hopeful that within the next year, there's going to be some breakthroughs. So and it's time for demo. If we don't have time, we can just do questions right away.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll have time. We've
Sure.
got about 5 minutes before Katie's going to come on, but we don't have anything in the Q&A yet. So if anybody has questions for Amar, go ahead and put them in. And then Amar, if you want to bring up your demo, if there's a couple of things you want to show, I know when we went through it, like even just seeing the sequencing of what tasks will run, even if we don't see them run, I think that's super interesting to this group.
Yeah, sure. I actually ran it, so we don't have to run all the
Oh,
things.
we don't have to wait for it. Nice.
Yeah. So this is a simulation of like one of the workflows that we have. This came on an interview, and we decided to just start messing with it. For example, let's assume we have traffic. Red here represent bad traffic, attack traffic, and green represent like human traffic. Now, we don't think we need to train a custom ML model to be able to distinguish between those. Those are bot traffic. Bots are now trying to scrape your data for training. They could be doing, e-commerce stuff. Um, and you train a model, and don't worry, this is not going to take. This is a very small model, and it's training on
That
a
was
very
really
light.
fast.
Yeah, it's a small data set, so that was fast. So the model trained. Um, the second step after the training the model, I could say, hey, LLM, could you really look into the outcomes of this training and analyze WAF logs based on that? It's going to do that quickly, and it's going to suggest to me uh, few rules. Here suggested 4 rules that I can generate. And after that, I could go down to, based on this suggestion, I could generate like a Terraform. So I have a Terraform pipeline, and I have a RAG who has access to what is already deployed. So I don't have to recreate a rule that I've done before. So the RAG could say, hey, you already did this. Why are you trying to do it again? And once all of that is done, I deploy, and I don't deploy to production immediately. You need a human in the loop. You still need someone to say, let's put this in staging. You can automatically do that. You can have an agent doing that behind the scenes. And once it's working on staging, it's not blocking legit traffic, it's just not doing something crazy, you can promote it to production, and you can also do a little bit of testing there before enforcing. So this is all I wanted to show. This is one example. There's so many things you can do in this fashion.
While we're waiting to see if more questions come in, Amar, talk about a bit how you're validating it internally, how you're going to decide when it's time to actually launch it as part of, a tool at Adobe.
Yeah, I think the most interesting and difficult thing in developing thing within the AI stuff is evals, which is just evaluating what your AI is doing. So AI is not deterministic, so you always tune it with more deterministic input. So you typically start with just non-deterministic. You say, I'm just going to rely on an LLM. You don't have access to anything but my source code, for example. Analyze this and tell me. And you get, 80% there. Then you start adding more context, and be careful with the context. AI love context, but too much context could be confusing to it. It could start,
It
making.
starts making it hallucinate, and yeah.
Yeah. So you explore that, like you try techniques like prompt chaining, and there's so many techniques out there now that you have to try. But once you start testing and recording your test results, testing and recording your test results. Once you have very good confidence that whatever you settled on is consistent, is giving you the same, you give it the same output or different similar input, and it producing the same output, that's when you're ready to move on to production. So you need a systematic process. You can't just not test your workflow.
And then we have a question from Katie. Knowing what Katie does for a living, I'm not surprised she's asked this question. She says, how do you evaluate build versus buy? As time goes on, as WAF vendors potentially advance their own capabilities. You and I have talked about this a little bit. So I'll add on an additional question here. Do you think WAF vendors will ever replace what you've done in this workflow? How do you decide where to put your time versus your money?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually passionate about this area, the area of build versus buy. And I come from engineering, and I think engineering are really good about making those decisions. Like they've been building a lot. Once in security, we're not building a lot. I think it's coming. Like people are in security more building more now. It's like engineering is coming to security, but it's not distributed equally. It's there. So we don't have that muscle there. So I don't encourage you to think a lot about building. I encourage you about a lot about, you have a lot of existing tools. There is no company that I work for that doesn't have a lot of security tools. Solve the gaps. Like I found the WAF gaps and I solved around them. Any tool you have today has gaps, right? So those gaps, the last mile problem, and solve it. This is how you start building that muscle. You could say, well, like once you develop that muscle, you now have the ability to say, I really do not need to buy a tool for this. In the case of WAF, you have three solutions. One, build it your own. That really a huge undertaking. Second, build like a SaaS, buy like a SaaS. That's um, that's out of the box support and whatnot. Still have limitation. The third option is use like an open source like mod security. Maybe you start there in the middle. You don't you know don't do any of the extremes and see what you can do with an open source. And then you could say, well, the open source is high maintenance, or I can keep up with the maintenance using AI. And if it's high maintenance, you go and buy the tool. So it's always about money. Just focus on the money. How much money will I spend if I buy it versus how much money will I spend on engineering hours if I build it myself? Once you have the numbers, make the decision based on the numbers. Don't make decisions based on anything else. Um, and going, remind me of your question again, Jen.
Oh, will there ever be a situation where you think a WAF vendor would be able to do this for you? And I guess I'll add on to that. I know you've said Adobe uses several different WAF vendors. So do
Yeah.
you see a future where you wouldn't use this, workflow and just offload it to a vendor, or do you just not see that being possible given the
So
intentional choice to have tools for all?
yeah, so the vendor is not gonna, no company is gonna share their source code like intellectual property with vendors. So that's a limitation for vendors. We're not gonna keep up with updating the vendor with all the like our internal threat model. If those get leaked, there's so many things I don't want to share with the vendor. So this give internal teams an advantage. Second, the vendors actually use some machine learning capabilities, but this machine learning is built for the masses. It's trained on the internet data. It's not trained on my Photoshop traffic. Meaning, like I think I gave the same analogy before. Do you want to be paid based on the average cost of living of Washington or Seattle? You probably want to be paid based on the average cost of living of Seattle, just because it's the expensive city, right? So I want to train and build a solution that is custom for each application, and the vendor is just not going to do that for me. It's just not it's not cost efficient for them to do that, and they don't have time for it. So they're going to solve for most people, and I'm going to take that solution and bring it to each of my teams, because that's what I'm hired to do, right? context matter in security, and AI also, enjoys the context. Like ML is pattern recognition on steroids, and the more data you give it, the more cleaner data, the more custom data, the better is the solution you will get.
Okay, one last question. First of all, there was a question about sharing slides. What I'll be doing after this event wraps up is we'll be publishing kind of like a blog version of the talk that'll include the video, a transcript of this, and also we'll PDF a copy of Amar's slides, so that'll all be available on LeanAppSec.com. The second part of the question, Amar, is I think there's some excitement around what your team has done and some curiosity around whether there's a GitHub or a guide of how you accomplish this so that other people can learn from you. What are you kind of thinking about in terms of sharing this with the world?
That's good. So some of this stuff still in motion, right? It's not ready. Like, it's high risk to open source a non-deterministic tool. I'm going to probably need to figure out the disclaimers there, right? Like, you have to go and adjust the tool. You can't use it as is depending on the use case. But we are happy to open source immediately, like a demo version that you can expand from there. Like, I think we can do that. Just give us some times. Find me on LinkedIn. Message me, and I will keep that. I will work out something with you. Whomever excited about this, it would be nice to get more ideas from them and actually think about how we open source this.
I love it. That's what this community is all about, is connecting people. So you should see Amar's LinkedIn up on the screen right here. Connect with him. I can attest to how responsive he is. Amar, you're also hiring a really cool role. It's a senior machine learning engineer for WAF detection. Tell the people what it is, how they can apply, etc.
Yeah, so the custom machine learning model you've seen, we need someone, not just WAF, like general security machine learning engineer, AI engineer, who is passionate about working in security. Find the position on Adobe's job site and reach out to me if you are someone who is interested or know someone. Feel free to share the link with your network on LinkedIn, tag me, whatever, help me fill out that position. It would be amazing.
Awesome. Referrals, connections, etc. appreciated. Amar, we'll pull you back in after Katie's session. But for now, thank you so much. This has been so interesting. Okay, as I re-invite Katie back to the stage, I can click and talk at the same time. We'll go ahead and launch another poll. And this time is going to be about your familiarity with industry analysts. So do you know what a tech industry analyst is? And then I'll add to that, nothing but wrong answers in the chat, please. Hey, Katie, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. It's great to see you again. Busy fall for you, huh?
Yeah. It's I've got for all the Star Wars references in the chat. I've got my memorabilia ready and raring to go. So
I love it. So we have some initial answers in our poll. About a third of people are saying they kind of have an idea of what a tech industry analyst is, which I think is what you and I basically expected. Another third or so have said that they know what you do, but haven't actually used an analyst before. And then we've got some nope, have no clues, and a very small slice have worked with an industry analyst before. We wanted to do something a little bit different for this session, and I'm sorry, I'd have every intention of coming up with some wonderful gifs of Mythbusters, and I totally forgot. If you remember the show Mythbusters from the late 90s, 2000s, the format is, talking through commonly held myths and scientifically busting them. We're going to take a little bit of a similar approach here because I think tech industry analysts have a place as you're learning, as you're researching new technologies, new vendors, new ways to solve problems. There was a question earlier in the Q&A that Katie, I absolutely want you to answer along with Amar toward the end. So I'll go ahead and step back and let you screen share, and I will be here.
Were we going to do this Q&A style?
Oh, we were. I'm sorry. My
Yeah,
brain was
because
totally like
prepare a presentation for this.
backwards. What are we doing? Why are we here? Okay. We do actually have a queue to start the Q&A, and so I think I know I
we had come up with some like 4 questions, right, Jen, that we
Yes.
wanted to focus on.
Yeah, I think what would actually be interesting as I pull up those questions, Phil is asking what we think the greatest misconceptions are that people have about analysts and how those views can be mitigated. And that's literally what we're going to talk about, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think we'll probably hit on probably the biggest hot button, which is the old words of pay to play that is often thrown around, right? And also I think some of the misconceptions around what it is, and I think the poll showed this, like what it is we even do, what's our place in the technology ecosystem, do analysts have any experience using tools? Does that matter? What are our backgrounds, and then how do you, I think a lot of the challenge with industry analysts, especially for practitioners that haven't worked with us before, is how do you even get in front of or talk with an analyst, whether you're an end user at an organization and you have questions about vendors in a market, or if you're a vendor yourself and you're selling software and you want to talk to an analyst, and how do you even do that?
Yeah, so the first myth that we're going to tackle is hot takes are what sells. And where this myth comes from is definitely there's a perception that analysts get paid to make up categories, to make up buzzwords. If we look over the last few years, whether you think they're real or not, there's categories like ASPM, which we can talk about today. Shift left, I think, may have come from an analyst at some point. What would you say about what this myth means and where the truth in it lies and where perhaps it's busted?
Yeah, I think there's obviously incentive, right, in the tech industry to coin new trends and categories, to be the person, whether you're an analyst or not, to have created a trend or a category, as much as we're currently in an acronym soup most of the time. The way I look at it is that an analyst's job really is to interpret the market, not manufacture it. And I think one important thing to understand about working with analysts is our job is to help you make sense of like where a company or a vendor fits into broader trends, to understand how a market is likely to evolve, and what we're seeing across vendors, users, and the data that we collect. And that doesn't mean that like hot takes are wrong. I mean, I have plenty of them, but I don't think that it's the MO for every analyst or every firm, right? And I'm personally not a big fan of acronym making. I have not made an acronym or a category in my time as an analyst, just like for its own sake. I think maybe what will help a little bit is to talk about what it is I actually do on a day-to-day basis. That, in my day, I'm often spending my time either I take briefings from vendors. So I cover application security and software supply chain security. So vendors in that space, they meet with me on a fairly regular basis. They walk me through their products, new features, their roadmaps. I also take inquiry calls from vendors too, who want feedback. They look to me to test their messaging, their strategy, or they might want to say competitive or market intelligence. But I also speak with not just vendors, I talk with end users. I'll have calls where a large enterprise will come to me and say, we're shortlisting a SaaS tool and we want like an outside neutral perspective on, this is our list. Are we missing anybody that maybe there's somebody in the market they haven't considered yet? And I help work through their maybe list of priorities and help them align them with what I know from all the briefings that I do about what a vendor offers. I also talk to investors who want to understand where a market segment is headed. So like bankers and folks that are, putting the money into the market, right? They look to me to understand larger trends and themes. And then all of this comes together in that I write research. I have what's called a research practice. I put together reports. I get to conduct surveys annually. And then I go to like conferences. I speak on panels and in webinars like this. And I try to stay active and engaged with, practitioners and vendors on social media. And so all of that, at the end of the day, I think in terms of the busting, while I definitely think, I'd say this is plausible if we're thinking about the show, right? Like there are plenty of analysts that you can blame for acronym creation, but I think that is sort of a surface level what comes out of all of the work that we're doing to sort of be those. I think I like to look at myself as like maybe a trusted advisor to that's sort of a independent party, for a lot of different audiences.
I think that segues really nicely into myth number 2, which is analysts are pay to play. And if we like unravel that a little bit, how can I expect you to be a trusted advisor if you're getting paid to push a vendor? So what would you say about that particular myth?
Yeah, I think this is probably maybe the most like vocal or long-standing myth about the analyst industry. And I get why it persists. I mean, after all, analyst firms are businesses, right? You can't deny that. And it's so there's always exchanges of money. Vendors do pay and to work with analysts, right? But speaking, which I can only do is speak for myself and for IDC, right? I can't speak for all analyst firms, but I would generally say this is pretty true I have lots of friends that work at all of the competitive firms as well. And, the one thing I can say is that the research that I publish into my practice and the advisory that I give particularly to end users is conducted completely independently of those things. And so I can kind of give you an example of, I just recently did an IDC MarketScape, which is one of those vendor evaluation pieces of research. And these are the things that usually drive a lot of the pay for play conversations. There's a lot of opinions, right? When you go and out there as an analyst and you put out like this chart and that's all anybody sees, right? Is the little dots and where they landed. And everybody has thoughts about the correctness of that, right? Or how did I come to those conclusions? And oftentimes, because of the way the analyst firm model, especially for the like larger firms, a lot of stuff is paywalled, right? Or it's like deep, the methodology is buried deep in. My report was like 54 pages, right? And the like back of it explained how it was all done. But when I did that piece of research, that involved a pre-qualification survey, I had to set criteria. I had a 125 question RFI that they had to answer. Each vendor that participated had to do an hour demo and an hour briefing, and they had to give me customer references that I surveyed and talked on the phone to. And then I took all of that information and it went into a very granular, detailed, a rubric really. And it was a very quantitative process behind that. But that stuff isn't like, unless you're the analyst that's doing it, that's all you see is the chart, right? So I think the thing to kind of narrow in on is that, while analyst firms are businesses, the integrity of the research is what gives that business value. If there isn't independence, the whole model falls apart, right? So I think of all of the things I would slap busted on, at least for myself, right, is that, the research that I'm doing, whether a vendor is a client of IDC's or has paid IDC any money over time does not influence my research in any way.
You and I have talked a little bit about how to decide if an analyst firm is right for, your specific use case. So, you've mentioned several times that IDC and you yourself focus on research. Can you talk a little bit about the other categories, the other flavors of analyst firms that are out there as people are thinking, like, do I want to bounce ideas off a firm? Like, what are the choices?
Yeah. There are, a lot of times you hear like the big three, right? Like IDC, Gartner, Forrester are probably the most well-known firms, but there are tens, 20, like there are a lot of smaller or boutique firms. And each one sort of has this like flavor of what they're good at. IDC is known for market sizing and forecasting. We model every vendor in a market, and we have the International Data Company. If you didn't know, that's what IDC stands for. And so, excuse me, our research is very data oriented. We do a lot of surveying, that kind of stuff. But then you have other analyst firms. Some focus more on, like, say, end user advisory work. Maybe they if you split your time between vendors and end users, they spend more time advising enterprises than they do maybe talking to vendors. Others really focus on like influence, maybe social media presence, and do more, say, like content marketing, where they'll partner, with a vendor and develop something and have that sort of neutral or independent validation of the work that they're doing. And then also it's like some cater more towards different sizes of organizations. So, some look more towards startups and helping them get visibility. Others maybe primarily serve like enterprise clients, and that one like really deep dives into those like established vendors in a market. So a lot of times it's just a matter of figuring out what it is that you're looking to get out of an analyst relationship, and then kind of seeing who's out there and matching up with them. And also some of it's personality too. Like I frequently work with people because they just like working with me, right? Regardless of what area I'm covering. My boss for many years at IDC had folks that would continue to cut. He was an analyst for 35 years, and the connections he built across the industry, like people just trusted him as a neutral third party, regardless of what his like coverage area was, what market he was researching, and then would just work with him, over his whole course of time as an analyst.
All right, we have a couple questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to skip one of our myths, and I'm going to address the third myth, and then we're going to go to the Q&A.
All right.
The third myth that we're going to talk about is analysts are out of touch. They're not practitioners. They're not in the job. Why would I can go call up, my friend who works at another company. Why would I trust an analyst who's not in the role?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Honestly, a good example here is I was not an application security practitioner before becoming an analyst. And kind of getting to there, a lot of analysts, some do come from a practitioner background. That's not an uncommon path for someone to take. They, maybe have been a practitioner, and a lot of times, I will say, as a younger woman, I am an anomaly in the analyst world. Oftentimes, you find more seasoned individuals, right, that have been around for a long time. But the thing is whether they were practitioners or not, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're out of touch. And some of the best analysts I find come from like really non-traditional backgrounds, because the core skills of what we do are more analytical, not necessarily operational. So like, for example, while being a practitioner in whatever field or market you're researching is helpful because it does obviously help you understand how certain technologies are implemented or maybe had experience with real world challenges. Sometimes that can create blind spots too, of like, you have this view of like, this is how we did it at the organization I worked at for the last 20 years. And it makes it harder to step back and see how the market as a whole is evolving, because being an analyst requires you to look across like hundreds of companies. I mean, I alone in application security, probably, I want to say my like spreadsheet, like database I have built has like 800 vendors on it, that, and the, myriad technologies underneath of that I track. And that broad view and the ability to identify shifts and trends, that's not necessarily visible from like any single practitioner's perspective. So, and I think the other thing I'll say on this too is that like technology also changes so rapidly that even if you had hands-on experience at one point and you would see that as valuable, that can become dated itself, right, pretty fast. So I think the important thing to think about analysts is it's more about that ability to ask the right questions, to connect the dots across like disparate data, to identify patterns, right? It's about like, I look at my skill set is that I'm really curious, I'm a critical thinker, and you also have to be able to clearly communicate things, because part of our job is translating like really complex and sometimes conflicting information into insights that people can actually like act on. And a lot of times I think what people say about analysts is we kind of have this bird's eye view, right? There's a particular position we have when looking at a market that not a lot of people have. I get to talk to like people who are direct competitors with each other and talk to their customers and go to user conferences and talk to the people investing money into the market. So I kind of have all of these different perspectives. So whether I've been able to learn the ins and outs of application security, about the topic and the technology, but like to do my job well, it's more about the skill set that's brought in my opinion.
Yeah, so we have an interesting question about AI and how it might be disrupting the job of a tech analyst, or even the necessity for a tech analyst. So let's like maybe talk a little both like short term and long term, because I think short term we're not seeing I would not anticipate AI would replace analysts short term, just based on what you just said. But where do you see maybe it supplementing or replacing?
Yeah, I think right now, this is a good question, and we ask it ourselves, like in the industry, and it's something we think about, right? And I think not just our industry is subject to this question of like, can AI? I think everybody in every job is like, can AI replace what I'm doing? I would say in the short term and right now, I look at AI as an advantage if you know how to use it well and not just create AI generated I have 8-year-old Gen Alpha kids that are very frequently talk about AI slop, and you can, if you don't know how to use generative AI well, you can succumb to AI slop as an analyst as well. But I think if you know how to integrate it in the right way into your workflow, I think it actually, at least for me, find it makes me faster. Like a good example is like, I love Notebook LM from Google. It has made my ability to like synthesize a bunch of information so much faster than I ever could in the past.
Yeah, plus one to that. Anybody who needs to like analyze documents, calls, whatever, like Notebook LM is so great for that.
Yeah, like for me, it's like obviously within the umbrella underneath application security and software supply chain security is huge, right? Like trying to track everything and understand everything that's happening, from like the recent NPM attack to understanding MCP servers and their security weaknesses, and how AI agents work and like all this technology, like using AI to help you learn, I think can help make an analyst better and faster. Long term, I don't think the question you're asking is wrong. I do think when I look at it in terms of like, is it going to change the analyst industry? Probably. At least it's going to force maybe some of the older models to and styles of like the paywall gated, some of the way the analyst business is run might have to adjust to adapt to AI. But the one thing I will say is analysts have a ton of NDA information. We get previews of things like well in advance of when they're out there, and we also, again, that multitude of different personas in an industry or a market that we're able to speak with and connect is a way that like I don't think AI ever could get to, because even if you trained a model on like say everything IVC ever wrote, right? There's always this level of information that's not published that we have, that we're able, that comes up in conversation. So much of what we do is not even written, right? Like it's had in conversations and advisory. That's the part that I think that AI can't touch right now.
Yeah,
anyway.
getting access to all that proprietary information, much like Amar was talking about earlier with there not being a future where he's going to offload all this WAF, rule generation to a vendor because of the proprietary nature of it. I think there's limits. So now is a good time for the three of us to talk about a question that came up in the Q&A an hour and a half ago. Let me find the right one to highlight. There's so many. I love it. Okay, I can't find it, but I copied it. So what's the best approach for shifting security left without overwhelming devs or slowing velocity? How much time do you have?
I know.
We've got about, 10 minutes or so that we can talk about this question. And I think, Amar and Katie, you both have very different backgrounds to be able to talk about this and talk about what you've seen people doing. So Amar, maybe you can start us off. What are some, like if you had to say three things, as a former developer and now as a security program owner, what do you need to do to like meaningfully shift security left?
Yeah, so shift security. So I lead DevSecOps for Adobe, so that's my thing, how to shift it left. But it's sometimes it's misunderstood as, hey, developers, do all of it. Here you go, like I identify the problem and I tell you about the problem and I walk away. We shifted the problem left, it's done. Developers are responsible. And this is usually paired with security is everyone's responsibility. So I slightly disagree with that. I think if you in security engineering or anywhere in security, you should be the person that is to be held accountable for security. So accountability is a big thing. So you can't say security is everyone's responsibility and walk away. HR is not everyone's responsibility. Legal is not everyone's responsibility. There is a specialist and expert. And when you hire a very expensive machine learning engineer, you do not want security to be a big part of their day. Like when you hire them, you do not hire them for security. You hire them for machine learning. So I think we need to be very careful with like just throwing words around this. So I think I've seen multiple iterations of shifting security left, and the incentive and structure for developers need to be right. You should make it so easy they can't say no. Like make them an offer they cannot refuse, and the offer is in the following: how could you just make it where the tool you introduce are not slow and tested and verified, you don't know anything. You just purchase a tool and then put it on CI/CD. That most people, I think when they think about DevOps or DevSecOps, they think about deployment and delivery in CI/CD pipelines. I think DevOps is more than that. Like you need a continuous security intelligence program. Like you need to understand what's happening all the way to the right to be able to inform you left practices. So you need to talk to your SIM people, your security operations, what they're seeing, and bake that into your shift left strategies. Again, if you need them to do something, make it easy, effective, and delightful. Uh, Reduce the number of meetings. That should be a goal. Like if you want to measure the success of your program, then amount of meetings they are required to attend is one. Another metric is the amount of documents they have to read. Um, and if you could eliminate those using automation, using things that seamlessly integrate with their workflows. For example, all of your developers starting going crazy about Cursor, that's where you need to pay attention to. Like 40, 50%, maybe now it's 80% for most organizations. How can I talk to cursors directly now using cursor rules, right? And you have to be smart about it. You cannot bring so many rules that distract the context. You really need to know what you're doing. So go and figure out what is context engineering, understand that, study that. So to really secure a thing, you need to know a little bit about it so you can seamlessly integrate it and just make it so easy. Easy said than done. That's why we ended up with security being somewhat broken in some many like this security opportunity now is huge just because it's easier to automate things. It's easier to create a workflow. Yeah, I in short figure out to make it easy, effective, and delightful by reducing the amount of time, being like the experience, the center of excellence as far as security. Do not reflect responsibility and saying security is everyone's responsibility and not bringing something to the table. These are areas where I would start.
Yeah, there's two things I would say to that. First, I think I've said it just about every LeanAppSec. Good security is about making the right thing easy and the wrong thing hard. And then the other thing I'll add is, well, I've been here in Raleigh. I got to know the team at Intuit a bit, and they told me about an internal study they did looking at the amount of time their engineers are spending on various tasks. And they found that basically a third of their software engineers' time was spent on what they call outer loop tasks, which are, maintenance tasks. It's upgrading, it's dealing with infrastructure, whereas a third was spent on inner loop tasks. That's the actual writing of the code. And then another third was spent on, architectural kind of work, like things that you do before you start building. And they're very intentionally trying to reduce and automate the things in that outer loop because, to your point, Amar, about, you hire this really talented machine learning engineer, and then what you're going to have them go do a bunch of stuff that's not machine learning work. So, looking for ways to reduce that outer loop while still being secure is what I think good looks like. Katie, you have been covering DevOps and DevSecOps, so I'm sure you have plenty of things to say on this topic.
Yeah, we could be here I could do a whole webinar on this, but the one thing first I'll add to do what I do as an analyst, validate third party through some of the survey research I've done. So I sit as an analyst with all our application development analysts. I don't sit with the cybersecurity people. So my colleagues in my team are the people that cover developers and open source and testing and DevOps and all of those things. And then I covered DevOps along with application security for the first 2 years that I was here. So I had some unique, my lens on the market's always been from sort of that SDLC perspective rather than from sort of the cybersecurity point of view. And one, we also found in a survey we did of like over 1,000 developers that it was like roughly 60% we calculated of their tasks were like the feature development, innovative work. So those outer loop and architectural things you're kind of referring to, right? So our numbers were pretty similar to what Intuit found internally. And then the thing I'll say is I totally agree with you on the make it easy. I think one of the patterns that I've seen with platform engineering in organizations is one way that some of this can start to get closer to that sort of more frictionless.
Talking about like paved paths, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
that how organizations are working. Whenever I've done any research on platform engineering, which I've done quite a bit of, the number one thing that always comes up that people are prioritizing with platform engineering is security and compliance guardrails and implementing security tools. And we don't often talk about platform engineering in application security spaces very often, but I think we need to more, because I think it's effective when you've mastered that discipline within an organization. It can be an effective way to make some of these practices and things more frictionless and less, to Amar's point of that, it needs to be easy, as easy as possible. And I think the last thing I'll say too is I totally agree with you, Amar, that like you have to think about application security as an entire loop, and things like a WAF and your runtime stuff, all of that needs to work together, right? And so when you have maybe a vulnerability that needs to be addressed, there's so many competing priorities that a developer has, that even like a critical CVE, that might not be at that moment the top priority. And when you have more defense in depth, and you have protections that can buy you time and say like, okay, well, we have RASP, or we have some sort of run ADR or runtime protection or a WAF in place that can allow us to prioritize when we have time to work on these things and balance them with, say, like the features and the business, directives that we have. That allows everything to feel like less of a fire. So I think it's important that while, I think shift left and the more you can do things early, I think is the ultimate underlying message there, that like, if there are things, if you can build things securely from the start, it prevents more of those fires from happening and having to be put out. It doesn't mean make developers do all the security, right?
Yeah,
I'm
I
sure
think that's a
everyone
bit of a
wants to say.
misperception with shift left, right? That
Yeah.
kind of just give it to developers. I would be a bad AppSec platform person if I didn't also add that it's really context. If you're going to be shifting things earlier in the process, it's even more important to make sure that the only things that are surfacing for your developers are the things that are actually important, whether that's the vulnerabilities that are reachable, or like what Adam was talking about earlier, how many features don't have any, threat modeling ramifications for security. Like, be very conservative in what you're sending to developers to ensure that you build that trust, that when I do send you something, it's important and it's worth acting on.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We are closing out on the end of our time here, and something that I forgot to mention at the beginning, but for people who've attended before, you may remember that each LeanAppSec we do a raffle, and we give away a very fun lightsaber. And I'm sorry, Katie and Amar, you cannot be winners.
Dang it, would go perfectly right here.
I know, it would fit in with your decor. So I am happy to share. Deepika went ahead and did the random drawing in the background. Anthony Herman, if you're still with us, you are the winner of the lightsaber. Let me just double check. Are you still around? You are. So Anthony, we will reach out by email to coordinate getting you the lightsaber. And then I have a little bit of a surprise raffle, and it's too bad Adam wasn't able to be here, but I promised him I would do it. We're raffling off 2 copies of Adam's latest book, which is let me get the title right because it cracks me up. What Every Engineer Should Learn from Star Wars. And so he, in like a very clever way, goes through the book, talking about the different threats in the Star Wars universe and how you can liken it to threat modeling and software development. And so The winners of our books are Michael Freeman and is it Yetzi Joe K. Congratulations to both of you. We will again reach out by email and coordinate getting you those books. We'll do one final poll here. Thank you, Deepika, for pasting in that. Oh, you won one last time, Anthony. Oh no. Okay, we'll do a little trade. Somebody else will get the lightsaber and we'll give you a book. That's my bad. So we'll go ahead and toss up the final poll here. We always like to get some feedback on how the event went. And so I'm going to go ahead and publish this poll. Let us know what you thought. We'll also take any written comments that you have in the chat. While we're waiting for those responses to come in, Katie, Amar, where can people find you in person this fall? Where are you going to be?
Yeah, I'm actually part of the analyst job, like I mentioned, is attending conferences. So I'm on the road for 3 weeks in a row, starting in Halloween week. I'll be at GitHub Universe in San Francisco. And then the next week, I will be at OWASP Global, as I mentioned earlier, in DC. And then after that, I'll be at KubeCon in Atlanta. So I will be all over the place. So if you see me, so usually I have some sort of color in my hair. I'm easy to spot. Feel free to flag me down and say hi. I would love to chat.
Awesome. And then where will you be this fall, Amar?
Mostly Seattle. Second week of November, I should be in the Bay Area for work. So if you're there, evenings we can, or early mornings we get coffee. But if you're in town in Seattle, Washington, happy to always chat. We have an event coming up in last week of November. I will also be speaking at reInvent, AWS reInvent this year. So if you're there,
that's big. Congrats.
If you're there, let's connect.
All right. And then I too will be at OWASP Global. So Katie, see you in a couple weeks. And then next week I'll be in Austin for LastCon. So if anybody is in Austin, come say hi. And with that, I appreciate everybody's time today. I always make sure we end on or early, and it looks like we're a few minutes early. So with that said, everyone have a wonderful week and weekend and fall, and take care.
Bye, everyone.